Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So I'm making one of my favorites, which is the Redux episodes to a previous episode I had done. So the one I'm sharing with you on the screen that was called The Rest of 2022 and the Untapped Market Theory is the one I'm going to be referencing in the beginning of this video. But I also want to talk about a few other things at the end. I'm going to kind of blend them into one video here. But I'm going to start off with this, and I'll include a link in the description to you if you want to check out the full context of the previous discussion on this, because it lays the groundwork nicely for what I'm about to talk about here now. Now, I'm going to give you the short version of it just so that you got the gist of it. When I was talking about the untapped market theory, it was discussing the general fallacy that I hear a lot of times, especially the last couple of years in particular, where people use the justification that just because a market hasn't been quote unquote exposed to enough people, that if you show it to them, then all of a sudden they'll be into it and oh, the market will explode. And I use several examples, including football cards, including a variety of other ones, but specifically I focused and fixated on wrestling cards because at the time, the great curator in one of his live streams gave a little bit of a precursor, gave a little bit of literary foreshadowing to kind of a plan they had. And again, I recommend that if you do have some time, check out this video because I play the clip and explain it a little bit more thoroughly. But they discussed the idea of Wrestlecon, which is a convention that was going to be coming up. So at the time I recorded this was back in November. So this Wrestlecon was going to happen months and months later. And it was going to be a place where they were going to go as vendors and try to quote unquote expose wrestling people to wrestling cards as if they had never heard of wrestling cards in the first place, which I thought was very silly and kind of gave me the impetus for the video itself. But why am I bringing it up now? As I said, I recorded this back in November, so why am I discussing this today? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why, and I'm going to share that with you, and then I'll elaborate on it a little bit further, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion on why a market like this is particularly susceptible to this. And also I gave the example, by the way, in this particular video, I gave the example of the whole Star Wars superfractor thing. Because from the people that brought you the Star Wars Superfractor thing, we're going to get the wrestling card thing that's coming up here as well. So as I said, this is one that I'm going to include for you in the description if you want to check it out. But then let me play you a clip and then we'll start talking about it a little bit. And I'll explain to you why I wanted to bring this up now. So through the power of editing, here we have the card show vlog from the Dallas Card Show in March 2023 with the great curator and Merlin. And I have a little clip for you, and let's have a listen and hear what they have to say in this Dallas Card Show vlog, in this particular piece of it.
Call this the curator effect, okay?
Hey,
the Merlin effect, okay? First, see, we're trendsetters, basically. We're trendsetters.
Yes, over a year ago.
First people copied Marvel, right? Now they're copying Star Wars, and I guarantee you, in a couple months, they will be copying wrestling.
Yeah, and it's your fault, because you're the one who told me to come to Dallas and bring that stuff.
So you heard it. From the original video back in November, they originally called their shot and gave a little bit of a foreshadowing thing. Well, now we're in March 2023. We've advanced forward. Why are we suddenly bringing this up again? Why has this been referenced a second time? And the answer, my friends, is on the screen, but I'll also read it out to you. Wrestlecon is coming up here, March the 31st to April the 2nd. So we are now, Wrestlecon season is nearly upon us. We are right on the precipice of having this wonderful event that's going to come up here that was referenced in the first place back in the November video and the November live stream. So here we are. So now that it's happening and now that it's close by, then this portion of the plan is going to soon come together. I want to bring it up now because I want to kind of bear it in mind for all of us to kind of keep an eye out on and see what happens with this one. And the reason, as I said, is that Star Wars beforehand was an example of it, and now wrestling cards are also a decent example of it. Any of these pop culture and also entertainment products have a certain susceptibility to it. And it isn't because of anything special with the category. It's really more of a conversation of volume versus the amount of participants in it. Anything that's thinly traded, and this is something that I discussed on the live stream and on videos before, anything that's thinly traded is always particularly susceptible to it. Because you can totally do this in sports cards. Let's get this right. We've already seen in the past, especially the last couple of years, examples of people pumping up certain specific sports card markets. We've seen it happen over and over again. But wrestling cards has a certain susceptibility to it, the same way that the Star Wars thing did as well, because there just aren't that many cards, the same way the Marvel PMG thing happened. Like, there's not enough cards, there's not enough volume, and there's not enough participants in it to spread it out as much. You can still do it in sports cards, but if you're talking about a more thinly traded market, it is a hell of a lot easier because you don't have to do nearly as much. A fewer amount of hands can control a greater proportion of a certain portion of the marketplace. Especially if you're talking about something like one of ones or something really low numbered, something thinly traded. You're taking thinly traded and you're taking low supply, and it's a combination that allows this kind of thing to be a little bit more dangerous than some of these other markets. So as I said, the Wrestlecon thing is coming up here, and that's the reason I wanted to bring it up. We're at the time I'm recording this 9 days away. So first I gave a little bit of a warning back in November to discuss it. And now 9 days out from it, I'm going to reference it again here. Just a bit of a reminder just to keep an eye out and see what happens coming out of this and see what happens as far as content or any discussion points on this. This is something I've been keeping an eye out on for some time, and since the second warning bell was sounded, I wanted to kind of keep an eye out on a little bit closer and discuss it with you on the channel. Now, with all that said, I do want to have a little bit of discussion on why this is one of the markets that's particularly susceptible to this. What is it about these categories? What is it about these entertainment cards? What is it about wrestling cards, Star Wars, and all these other things in Marvel that made them particularly susceptible to it? As I said a couple of minutes ago, it's really the supply thing, where a fewer amount of hands can control the supply. It's also the fact that comps are very difficult to come by, because you can kind of make up your ticket, especially if you're talking about the stuff that doesn't really have comps. And I'll give you a couple of examples here that hopefully will kind of illustrate the point, but maybe it'll be a little bit of a help here. So let's start off with this. I've got good old Terra Peak up here, and I've got a bunch of different WWE superfractors that I want to share with you and look at. So what I've done is I've sorted them by the average sold price, and I'm focusing my attention on the highest sales on eBay. Again, this is only one platform, but I think it'll give us a little bit of an analogy and example. So if you're checking out the video version of this, you'll get that. I'm going to do a podcast version of this with the audio. I'll read it out to you a little bit so that you can get that as well. So I want to focus on a couple of specific ones. The high watermark we know is $15,000 back in February of 2022 was a Roman Reigns Superfractor 1 of 1 from 2014 Topps Chrome. I'm going to ignore that one because that one is the high level outlier of this whole thing. And then also there was a 2021 Topps Transcendent Vince McMahon Superfractor. This sold for just over $9,000, so $9,326. I'm not going to focus too much on that one, but that is also a notable sale. Again, Vince McMahon doesn't sign too many of these. Transcendent was the top product that Topps came out with, so I can kind of understand that. But what I want to look at is I want to start looking at a couple of the ones underneath it and start getting a little bit of an idea of where this kind of becomes a problem, because you're going to see certain characters are going to reoccur over and over again, kind of leading into what I started off the discussion with. So let's look at the next one here. The next one after that is $8,138 in an open auction. I prefer an open auction rather than a fixed price best offer, but this was an open auction. Sold for $8,138, and this was a 2021 Topps Finest Roman Reigns Superfractor. Now that's a fantastic sale. It's a very strong sale, but that was back in March of 2022. So this is about a year ago now. Just shy of a week shy of a year ago, actually, almost exactly to the dot, funny enough. But here's the thing. If you want to see this card, and I'm gonna blow up this card so you can see it on the video. So we got the card here. If you want to see this card, you can, because it is available on eBay right now as we speak. For the princely sum of $25,000 US, it is now graded in a PSA 9, but it's the exact same card. It's a 1 of 1. It's the only one of its kind. So you can go get it or make an offer on it at $25,000. But here's the funny thing. So what happened? It was $8,000 before, and now it's being put on eBay for $25,000 for best offer. Who would mark it up 3 times just randomly for no reason? Well, I'm going to direct you over to the right side of the screen, and you're going to see it's our good friend, the great curator. Well, of course it is. Who else would it be? But here's the thing. I want to make this abundantly clear. If you own a card and it's a 1 of 1 or any really low numbered card that doesn't have many comps, guess what? You can price this for whatever you want. He could have put in $250,000. That's his right. He can put in whatever price he wants. But again, we're talking about someone here who has already elaborated various times that he's going to, promote the hobby. And we did this already. We did this with the Star Wars Superfractor, if you guys remember, and I referenced that even more so in the previous video that I referenced at the beginning of this video. And when I discussed it at that time, back in November, I pointed out the Star Wars Superfractor thing where he was able to convince Dappz Sports to purchase that Star Wars Superfractor for $16,500 after he had purchased it for $5,000 after he bought it from Merlin for, I guess, who had bought it, I guess, for a couple of $100. I forget what it was. Like, there was a couple of moves between the time that it started and then the time that he got it for $5,000 and then the time he sold it for Dappz for $16,500. And I want to be clear about this. Outside of an individual negotiation and him just deciding that that's the price he wanted, there was nothing to connect it to anything. The idea was, well, it's worth more. And if you guys remember at the time that the video that came out, and I'll see if I can find it for you and link it in the description as well. At the time that Dappz came up with the video chronicling this, when he was, doing his powwow with his homies, he was talking about it. He goes,
please don't fucking do this. No, I'm telling you, this card's worth $100,000.
I think it's going to be a $100,000 card, which again is based on air. It's based on nothing. Like there is nothing to connect it to any number in reality. So bringing it back to this listing here at $25,000 US, you're more than welcome to list it for anything you like, and you can certainly field offers and see what happens. But outside of the fact that you would like to triple your money, what justification is there for this? Oh, it's graded in PSA 9. So what? It's a 1 of 1. In ungraded, it really makes no difference. Graded or ungraded, what if it was a PSA 10? Would it have been 50,000? I guess so, maybe. Who knows? But the point is that there's no value add here. It's just you bought it for this decent price, like certainly a year ago, and here it is available a year later. And if you want to pay triple or over triple in this case, then you can certainly do so. Or you can make an offer and try to get it, I guess, for double, quote unquote, maybe. Get a bargain, hashtag bargain. The point is that there is really no connection to anything here that would suggest to you that the value is here for that. Unless someone is willing to come by and pay for it, in which case then, fair game. But such is the issue with cards like this. And that's kind of what resulted in various cards, and I'm going to show another one here that I've already shown on the screen here, that resulted in a bunch of these cards being listed for these ridiculous totals. So now I'm showing a 2021 Topps Transcendent Alexa Bliss. It's a different seller in this case. It's being listed for $12,999, $13,000. Where the hell did they come up with this number? Lord knows. But if I go back to my Terra Peak here, that is the next one underneath that one, and it was bought for $8,000 fixed price on April 19th, 2022, also about a year ago. What's funny is if you're noticing these highest numbers ever were all about a year ago, give or take, because around that time, some of this stuff was going really, really high. At that time, it was a bit of an upswell in a lot of it. And the most expensive one was back in February of 2022, a little over a year ago. No, these are not coincidences. This is the latest one that kind of came up. We have to go down underneath that, and we've got to go down to, we can go to February 2023. We've got a $5,000 fixed price on a 2020 finest Roman Reigns Superfractor in a PSA 9. So here we go. We've got the previous year's Topps finest Superfractor in a PSA 9, sold about a month and change ago for $5,000, but we have this one here for $25,000 for reasons. This one's a year later, and it's the same grade in PSA and $25,000 for reasons. Again, these numbers don't have any connection to anything. Trying to comp these things is next to impossible. I don't blame anybody for getting stuck trying to figure out how you could even come up with it. Regardless whether you're interested in this or not, or whether the numbers make any sense to you, the point is that you run into this bit of a problem. And when you have a market that's kind of operating in this way, you're basically just making up numbers for the sake of making up numbers and trying to have a little bit of fun with it, I guess. All of this is to say that it would be wise for folks that are in this space to pay a little bit of a closer attention to this and be really cognizant and be vigilant, trying to make sure that when you're operating in these spaces that you're operating honestly, because it's stuff like this that resulted in a lot of these superfractors listing on eBay. If you go to eBay right now, and actually I can probably do it for you. Let me just do it as I'm kind of talking to you. Let me go to WWE Superfractor, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to list these, and I'm going to go with ending soonest as I'm talking, and I'm going to list through these, and there's basically one available for auction that's at $56, fine. But if you go searching through, you're going to see a lot of stuff that's listed as kind of a best offer or really high. So $1,000 for a superfractor of Undertaker, that's just an insert. A Big E superfractor, $400. Sheamus, $750. I'm not going to read them all to you. The point is, the reason why you're seeing a bunch of superfractors listed at a ridiculous amount. Timothy Thatcher superfractor, $899. You don't need to be a wrestling expert to understand that there's a lot of random names that are being thrown in at these high dollar amounts just because. Jeff Hardy Superfractor, $1,500. $1,000 for Bianca Belair Superfractor. It became the case that Superfractor equals put a really high number on it and hope for the best. Here's a 2021 Topps Transcendent, which is that huge product. A Cesaro. Cesaro is actually in AEW now. And, he's doing well from that perspective. He's the ROH champion. He's at least getting some TV time. $7,500, though, he's not doing that well. Not quite to that degree. And you just kind of keep flipping through it. And as you go through it, you realize, like, okay, what's the justification for this? There is none. That's the problem. Bobby Lashley here. WWE Chronicles Phoenix Gold Refractor, $1,000. Why? Reasons. Kofi Kingston Superfractor, $800. Why? Reasons. And that's basically it. It's the same issue over and over again. And this is all stemming from the original big sales that I cited to you earlier in that Terra Peak listing. And that justified suddenly everybody and their brother listing all these things at the highest price they think they can get away with, hoping that somebody will bite. And the problem is I can scroll through this and I'm seeing that nobody's biting. I'm sure someone will eventually, but the point is you're noticing that a lot of these, even this, Mansoor Superfractor, $400 or best offer. It's a PSA 9. Go for it. Have a good time. Good luck. When you have a lot of folks with big aspirations and they saw those big eye-popping numbers about a year ago, it's not shocking to me that these folks have not readjusted to the reality. I would love to see what a lot of these would sell for if you put them in an open auction starting at a reasonable, more modest number and see what the real marketplace ends up being at. But that's kind of the point that I wanted to make with it about being vigilant and being aware of stuff like this. And by the way, it's not limited to this. It could be those Disney cards that are getting a little bit of traction now. It could be the Star Wars again if that comes back around. It can be anything else. But that's kind of the general issue that comes with a lot of these, is that now you've got a lot of folks who are very well vested and have a lot of vested interest in trying to convince everybody that we introduced Superfractor or one of one. Oh my goodness, it has to be hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars just because. And that isn't necessarily the case. And that's kind of the way it's always played out. Now, with all that said, I do want to take a couple of minutes to talk about one other factor that kind of makes this tricky. And that is to say that in all this discussion I've had, I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. There is some demand for this product. The fact that these are way overpriced doesn't change the fact that there is demand for the product. But that demand in some cases can kind of skew in one direction and kind of leave us confused. Because one of the pillars of trying to collect in a lot of these markets is trying to figure out either how to create a comp, a valid comp, or trying to find some comparable, something that you can try to compare that'll allow you to try to figure out, okay, so what the hell should I even offer? And there are a lot of these little elements that make this particularly difficult in this space. And I want to give you an example of that. I'll give you a little bit of a taste. So now what I'm sharing with you is an Instagram post from a big-time Becky Lynch collector that has included an image with a bounty of most wanted cards. And I follow this person on Instagram. They've got a fantastic collection. Kudos to them for building a great collection. And very clearly, from this image here that you can see, they are very willing to reach deep into their pockets. And I'll read you a couple of examples of it on this picture to get a bit of a gist of where they're willing to go with it. So these are pertaining to different high-end cards for Becky Lynch. One of them is a 2020 Topps Chrome Becky Lynch Superfractor 1 of 1. And the offer here is $15,000. It's a $15,000 offer on that card. And the second one here is a 2022 Immaculate Becky Lynch Premium Memorabilia Autographs 1 of 1 with the WWE logo, also $15,000. Then there's a Bianca Belair Becky Lynch Dual Autograph Memorabilia offer, $7,500. $5,500 for a National Treasures 2022. A 2022 Prism Champion Signature Black 1 of 1 offer, $4,750. The point that I'm making is these are very, very strong offers. Well, I can tell you right now, the second one of these, the Premium Memorabilia Autographs one, that is already in hand with another Becky Lynch collector. So this is Adam Gelman, who's well known in the wrestling community as being a Becky Lynch super collector, who happens to have that card, that 1 of 1, and was able to acquire it. So I don't think he's going to be selling it even for the $15,000 offer. But the point that I wanted to make with this, though, and the key piece that I wanted to share with you, and kind of as a bit of a thought in this category, is the idea of value. I already talked earlier about some people trying to manipulate value and basically making up numbers out of the sky. Well, in this case, this isn't a number made out of the sky. Assuming that somebody took up this person on this offer. So obviously the second card is off the list right now because unless Gelman wants to collect a $15,000 bounty, that card isn't going to be sold. But let's say the 2020 Topps Chrome Superfractor became available and somebody sold it for $15,000. Here's the question. Is it then worth $15,000? Seems like a silly question, but it really isn't. In reality, the old adage is something is worth what somebody's willing to pay. And that's sort of true. In an open market, to a certain degree, that's true. But this would not necessarily be an open market. This would be a, individual transaction. This would be a private deal. You've got a bounty that's being collected. And again, let's assume the 2020 Topps Chrome Becky Lynch Superfractor owner sees this and says, $15,000? Don't mind if I do. I will accept your offer. And they are able to come together, come to a deal. The money changes hands. Done. Is the card worth $15,000? Sort of. It's worth $15,000 for that brief shining moment. But if that card was to be put on the open market right after that, would it still be worth $15,000? We know one person that was willing to pay $15,000. Here's the question. What is the next highest person willing to pay? If it was in the open market and one person was totally willing to pay $15,000, but the next person was willing to pay $3,500, then in reality, the value of the card would be one increment above $3,500 because that's what would happen in an open auction. In this case, though, the theoretical maximum of $15,000 is out there. And let's say that deal was made that I mentioned a little earlier. So then, if Becky Lynch is worth $15,000 as a superfractor, then in that case, is this $25,000 request out of whack? And that's kind of where the question is, because what would happen, right? If you were to put this back in sports cards, let's bring it back over to sports cards for a second. Let's take two guys that were at least contemporary to each other for most of their careers. Let's take Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. My personal favorite, channel favorite, Tom Brady. Okay, most people consider Tom Brady to be better than Peyton Manning. I can make some jokes here. I'm not going to. I'm going to resist. But let's say, for the sake of argument, let's put the pecking order that Tom Brady's ahead of Peyton Manning. How much ahead is really up to you. You figure out what you think the ratio is. But let's say we had two equivalent cards of the two guys from the same series. So something similar to this, the whole one of one thing. Let's go with that general premise. So if we've got this idea that Brady should be 1.5 times the Peyton Manning, 2 times the Peyton Manning, whatever. And all of a sudden somebody comes in over the top and says, I'm going to pay double what the Tom Brady's worth to get the Peyton Manning. Does that mean that the Tom Brady should be recalibrated to adjust to it? In theory, I suppose you should. But the question is the marketplace there? Because that's what the market was before. Just because one person is willing to pay way more for Peyton Manning than anybody's ever paid before, does that mean that the Tom Brady should suddenly go up automatically? What if the buyer isn't there? What if they're not willing to pay it? So do we just rearrange the pecking order? Is that what happened? And that's kind of the example I gave with this one. The reason I shared this example is this is a 2020, but let's say it's a 2021 to make it apples to apples. If we made it a 2021 Topps Finest to make them equal, and somebody was willing to pay $15,000 for the Becky Lynch, Roman Reigns arguably is the bigger star between the two of them, going to WrestleMania, going to be in the main event, has been the champion for over 900 days, pushing 1,000. In theory, he should be at close to his apex as far as value is concerned. He's about as good as he's going to be. And if he goes past WrestleMania, maybe he goes over to Hollywood, does some movies or whatever, maybe that'll increase his profile even more. In theory, he should be above Becky Lynch. So if Becky Lynch is worth $15,000, then is $25,000 out of whack? In theory, the answer is no. But do we base a comp based on a hypothetical bounty for a card that hasn't actually sold? And that is kind of one of the things that has always been a bit of a question. And that's always been something that I've always kind of had to put into question, is that we're operating on hypotheticals. We're operating on theoreticals. Right now, all I've got is reality. Reality is these numbers here. Whether you believe them or not, whether somebody paid or not, in Terra Peak, somebody has to have paid for it to remain on Terra Peak. So I can take these with reasonable comfort that these numbers are accurate. But a lot of these numbers, when I'm looking at the biggest figures here, I'm looking at a year ago. I'm looking at 2022. I'm looking here. Ric Flair's Superfractor, $4,273, 40 bidders. May 1st, 2022. I'm seeing July 30th, 2022. September 2022. June 2022. I'm seeing very few 2023s. If I see them, they tend to be a lot lower prices. $2,500, fixed price, whatever that means, January 2023. And then I got to scan through. I see 2021. I see 2022 over and over again. So what's the marketplace today? This in a nutshell is the challenge. The reason why I wanted to kind of combine these two thoughts together is that this is the challenge that is kind of presented in this marketplace. Regardless of what some people want to say, that is the reality. The marketplace has decided that a lot of these items already peaked about a year ago. So just increasing, coming up with a really crazy, sticker figure and sitting there hoping that somebody will come up to your number or somewhere close to it isn't going to change the fact that the marketplace might not be there for it. And that's kind of what makes a lot of this stuff really interesting, is that I've sat back and I've tried myself, in addition to what other folks have done. I've been trying to figure it out for myself too. I've been trying to sit back and trying to understand where we should be going with this. And I'm not sure. I'll be completely honest with you. When I sit back and I watch a lot of these categories and I watch a lot of these items, it is hard to say where we should be. I obviously think that the absolute top numbers of this don't really match up and jive with what the current reality is. I don't know the buyers are there. I don't believe necessarily that that is the case, but that is really where we find ourselves. And that's really the challenge that a lot of folks that do want to participate in this space, honestly, do find themselves trying to fight against. You've got a bunch of conflicting figures. You've got a lot of very passionate collectors who are willing to certainly reach into their pockets very far. But the reason I gave this example earlier is that this is a very specific niche case. I did the comparison with Roman Reigns just as an exercise, just for fun. But the reality is there's other characters that are also very popular too, but don't necessarily have the collector base to be able to push it. It is a thin market. There are a handful of collectors that I would associate that would probably be willing to go pretty deep in their pockets to buy Becky Lynch cards. Does that mean that it's going to apply for Bianca Belair cards? Does that mean it's going to apply for Alexa Bliss cards? Or Roman Reigns? Or John Cena? Or The Undertaker? Or Triple H? Or pick any character, Stone Cold Steve Austin, pick any other character you want. Maybe, but not necessarily. And if the people that are willing to reach the deepest into their pockets are Becky Lynch collectors, does that mean Becky Lynch is the most valuable card in the hobby? Well, not necessarily. It just means that they've got the handful of folks that are willing to go that far into their pockets deep enough to make it so, even if the other characters are more popular in every other metric. And that's kind of the weird circumstance we find ourselves in with this specific category. So more than anything, it was some food for thought, and I wanted to bring back the original premise to kind of give everybody heads up that, we're coming down to the time period where we're going to see this try to play out. We'll see what happens after Wrestlecon, and if any content comes out of that that tries to promote a different view of the wrestling card hobby than what I've been seeing the last maybe year or so that I've been particularly paying attention to it. We'll have to see what happens with that one, but it's something interesting. I'd be curious to get what your thoughts are in the comments section. If you do listen to this in the audio version, feel free to leave any kind of a comment or any kind of a rating or anything that's on there. Otherwise, more videos coming up on the YouTube channel, including the live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.